Hi, and welcome to the Making the Media podcast, and the second episode where we're looking at some of the challenges facing the post-production sector. My name is Craig Wilson. Thanks a lot for joining us. Now, this episode comes after our previous one with Emma Butt the last time around. Now, if you haven't listened to it, I suggest you check it out on your podcast platform of choice. This time we're speaking with Gemma Nicholson, who's the founder of Post Super, which we'll come on to talk about in a bit. Gemma trained to work in sound, starting her career as an assistant and first assistant sound editor, quickly working on major feature films such as the Harry Potter series. Her career developed and she became a sound editor, again working on a variety of films, then supervising sound editor. But it was that move up the career ladder that prompted her to rethink her career, leading to the establishment subsequently of Post Super, a company dedicated to help people in the post-production community through information, training and tools. Gemma talks about all of that, plus some new micro-certifications from Avid. But to begin with, she talks about why she decided to make that decisive change in her career out of the world of sound.
I was a really good assistant sound editor. I really enjoyed my job moving media from one place to the next place, to making sure somebody had a desk, making sure somebody had food, making sure somebody had information. I was really good at the organizational part of that. And with those big sound teams, I was working with 10, 15, 20, 25 people at a time, kind of in those sound teams, and working with them for a really long time. So between 8 months and a year at a time on a project. So I really was able to establish myself, and I was able to, really make friendships, and I was really good at my job. But the problem was when I stepped up to being an actual sound editor. So, and I will say by that time I've done 5 years of sound education and 6, 7 years of working in the industry, and I was stepping up to being a sound editor, and all of a sudden I was no longer getting to speak with everybody. I was no longer getting to do the organizational part. I was sitting in a room by myself and I was editing sound, and I found that incredibly lonely, and I didn't love it. And I actually felt slightly embarrassed, I think, at that time, because this thing that I'd said I'd wanted, and that I had worked damned hard, and I've been damn lucky, and there was a lot of I had a real following wind. I really worked hard through that entire period. I did 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 hour, 100-hour weeks on some projects. I worked really hard, but it felt slightly embarrassing that actually I realized I didn't love it, and that it wasn't my thing. But I was very lucky in the fact that I then saw an opportunity to move into the organizational side. Jessie Thiel, she was Jessie Thiel, she's now Jessie Schroeder. Jessie was the first post supervisor I'd ever met. And she had a coordinator called Katie Reynolds, who was a brilliant coordinator. And she stepped into the role of post supervisor on the later Harry Potters. And I worked for her as a coordinator on Harry Potter 7 Part 2. And that was my first post-production coordinator role. And then I moved into the world of post-production coordination, and I worked with Katie on big project after big project for Warner Brothers and Disney. And we worked on massive projects like Disney Cinderella and Tim Burton film, and lots of different stuff. But I had 2 children during that time, and it worked really well for me as a role. I really enjoyed being a post coordinator, and again I was working on those massive films, so the $100 to $150 million films. So all my experience up to 2014 or so was quite skewed to that ultra high budget level. But then I moved into being a post supervisor, and I really struggled, actually, because I stepped down to step up. So I stepped down onto lower budget projects, but they were still 40, $50 million films, and which sounds silly to say you step down onto a such a large budget film, but I I really didn't know what I was doing, because when I was on those ultra high budget shows, you're very siloed. You're there to do to do a very narrow job, but to do it very well. To do, so you're narrow but you're deep. It's kind of you're there to really kind of caretake every aspect of the elements that you're there to take care of. And as a post supervisor, I realized that there was so much that I didn't understand.
So you described there where you kind of ended up in your dream job, and then discovered that perhaps it wasn't the right thing. How did you deal with that? Because that must, to work towards that for a long period of time, to then get to that point, how did that impact what you felt about what you could do within the industry?
It was really disappointing at the time, because I just felt this growing feeling of that I was not in the right place, and that I was doing things that I didn't love doing, kind of I was bored by it. And that sounds awful, because like it genuinely it felt awful, because I felt like a huge imposter syndrome, because so many people want to be there. Like if you were to ask, an assistant sound editor or a sound editor, what's your dream job? Like, holy crap, working on some of those incredible films. Yeah, that's obviously where you'd want to be. But I felt like an imposter, and it didn't feel good. But I also knew what I was good at, and I knew I've always been very decisive, and if something's not right, you change it, and you make the best decision with the information you have at the time, and then as soon as you have more information, you make a better decision. So it was I did cast about a lot. There was a 2 or 3 year period there where there was a transitional period, kind of 2006 to 2009 or thereabouts, where I was, do I make this decision? Do I not? How do I go forward? That there was, there was an indecisive period, as I said, about 2006 to 2009. But I found the right thing. Interestingly, I kind of, it was with all the same amazing people that I've been working with. And I was so lucky that Katie took me on as her coordinator. And I did have to learn a huge amount. You can't just step from being an assistant sound editor and a sound editor into being a post coordinator and supervisor. There's a whole process of learning that, that you have to go on in order to do that.
So we'll come on to talk about learning in a second. Before we talk about Post Super, the organization, I think it's probably worthwhile just exploring a little bit about what a post supervisor actually is. Because I'm guessing, again, from what you said there about different scales of production, that maybe the requirements are slightly different, but the fundamentals are the same.
Yeah, it is the fundamentals are the same. Essentially, a post supervisor is there to be the point person for post, all the way from prep all the way through to delivery. You're there as somebody who is responsible for always having an eye on post, and that includes picture, sound, sometimes visual effects, but even if you're not directly responsible for visual effects, you're responsible for incorporating those visual effects into the workflow and facilitating that part of it. Then I'm saying obviously, but also those deliverables that are at the very end of the process, because if you don't deliver that final set of contractual deliverables, then your production company won't get paid their final installment. So it is it's quite an important position to have in your project, because it takes all the stress away from the creatives, and it takes that otherwise they're busy managing things that actually are not really in their wheelhouse. Creative people are great at being creative, they're maybe not great at managing their budgets and the schedules, and that's what the post supervisor is there to do. We're there to work with all the key stakeholders, whether that be the sound department or the picture department or the visual effects department or the post facilities or the producer and the director and the distributors or the network or the streamer, whomever that might be, to pull everything together with workflow, budget and schedule, making sure that everybody is on the same page.
So why set up an organization called Post Super?
the reason I set up Post Super was because I saw early on that there was an explosion in the number of post supervisors being needed around the world. Kind of 2018 or so, I was I was a good post supervisor, but I struggled a lot. There were lots of things that I didn't know how to do. I'd moved from being on that 100 to $150 million film onto being on a lower budget project. And on a lower budget project, there's less people to take care of all the different tasks. So you're asked naturally to do more. You're wider, but you're shallower in the way that you deal with something. So you have to deal with a lot more aspects of the production, and there were things that I didn't know how to do. Like I'd never put together a credit roller, for example, and that's a key role. That's a key part of the role for lower budget projects. There is also the there's other elements kind of that I genuinely had never had any education in, and I just felt like I made it up as I went along, and I didn't feel like that was good enough. And so I kept looking around for some kind of education, like somebody was coming to save me, and nobody ever did. So I thought, well, if nobody's going to do it, then I'll put something together. And so that's where Post Super started. It was literally the answer to my own kind of misery. It was my pain point. I felt underprepared. I felt insecure. And I wanted to be the best that I could possibly be at my job. And so I went and I kind of, we did that, and we threw ourselves at finding information, finding tools, finding, making sure there was a community, because there was already a community in the UK, and a strong community, but it was quite, it was growing at too big a rate for, the current community to kind of keep up with it. So we just took care of that part of it.
But what kind of work do you do, and what help do you offer to people who work in the industry?
Yeah, so we provide lots of different training schemes. We work with training providers across the world, actually. We were really very lucky, again, that I come back to luck, but it was a serendipitous moment of Post Super. I knocked on the door of the National Film and Television School for a guy called John Wardle, who is the director of it's a fantastic film school. And I said, look, there needs to be, and I'm knocking on the door, there needs to be a course for post-production supervisors. And it was very lucky because, a few months before that, Cynthia Canner, who is a fantastic head of post at Warner Discovery in the US, she also knocked on his door and said, look, there needs to be a course. I can help pay for this. Like if we can put something together, we can get some traction on this. So I was able to kind of step into that role. I worked with a fantastic post producer called Layla Blackman, who's a legend as a post producer, and she was so generous with her knowledge and her contacts, and we put together this amazing course. But we also put together many other courses. Post Super's put together many courses for other kind of companies such as ScreenSkills in the UK, and we've worked with some massive names now in terms of Netflix and Prime, and it's been a wild ride as the last 4 or 5 years. It kind of just creating lots of education, and most recently we've been working with Avid. So yeah.
Yes, so tell us a little bit about that, because I understand that's around micro-certifications. So it's probably worth a little bit of an explanation about what that is, and then what the actual certifications are themselves.
Yeah, they're micro-certifications. I'm so proud of these micro-certifications, like off the charts proud. My chest swells. I feel so much proud for it. But we have over the years collated a huge amount of training to do with all areas of post, picture, sound, deliverables, etc. And the post supervisor education has to be at quite a high level. We don't need the nuts and bolts. We don't need what button do you press to make the export? We don't need that. We need to know that it's being done and how that fits into the general big picture. It's almost like we need to see how the jigsaw fits together. And so that's what we've become experts in terms of training. Now, I was increasingly being told by the people who were taking our courses, why is this not available for, the wider community? This is post-production training. This is not just post-supervisor training. It's equally applicable for someone in the sound department or somebody in the picture department who's working in editorial or maybe picture finishing or whatever department they're working in, to know how they fit into this grander scheme, because there's so many different parts of post-production that you have to know what your place is in it. And if you can understand that and understand the decisions that are swirling all around you, you can understand why we might need you to do a specific task, or why there is a specific chain of events that needs to happen before what you would like to get done right this second can be done. And that applies very much to workflow in terms of everything from prep through shoot through fine cut into final post and delivery, as it does the deliverables that you are producing right at the very end of the project need to be queued up, and the appropriate decisions need to be made in prep for the project, so that you are preparing in prep for the end of your project. You're starting with the end in mind. So it's fascinating how those things affect everybody who's working in post and how important that is. And the one bit of feedback that we have from the course is that people feel more confident in their jobs doing the training. And that's what gives me pride, because it's the idea that we are enabling people, we are empowering them to be better at their work. And it can only help to have a more empowered workforce.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges, I guess, in post-production overall, and this is actually something that was discussed at the Avid Learning Summit that you and I were at, a couple of months ago, Gemma, was that, fundamentally it's a freelance market.
Yes.
And within a freelance market, that can be challenging around funding for training and things like that as well. So how does it work from that kind of perspective of making sure that the people who have the requirement or the need for these kind of skills can actually get them?
Well, there are a number of great training organisations. Like, for instance, ScreenSkills in the UK is an excellent organisation. It's government, well, it's all funded. It's a variety of different kind of aspects to its funding, but essentially it is there as a support for the freelancers in the industry. So we get a lot of funding for our courses through them. We've worked with them on many courses now across the board, training people in post-production. But there's no easy way to fund a course. You sometimes you need to identify for yourself as a freelancer your gaps, and then be able to go and find the course that fills that gap, whether that be a course in if you're in sound, it would be Pro Tools, or an Avid course, Media Composer, or an Adobe course, or a Blackmagic course for picture. Whatever you might need, it's important for you as the individual to identify what you need. And I think that I love the idea of learning pathways. I love the idea of certification programs. I think that will be a fantastic addition for the industry. And I know that some of that is being worked on in the background by some of the contacts that I have. But anything that can, as I said, come back to empowering people who are working in the industry to find a path that works for them. And be trained and feel secure in that knowledge. I don't think that training, by the way, is the be all and end all. There is so much that can be learned from being on the job, the experience that comes from doing the job day in, day out, having a great mentor that can mentor you and as somebody to ask a silly question of. But I also think that there is a place for learning and knowledge as a baseline that you can build that experience around. So if you have a baseline of knowledge that to be true, then you can put layers and layers of experience on top of that, and actually feel much more secure in your career path than you would have done otherwise.
So you talked about career path there, and that was like exactly where I wanted to go with this. So you talked earlier on about having a point of your career and having a change of direction to move to another path. And I think when we talk a lot about, people coming into the industry, there's a big focus on, new talent comes into the industry as well. But the question I really wanted to ask around and really about the role of Post Super in this is helping people who are mid-career, who perhaps want to make a change or they want to move into something else. It can be daunting if your focus has been on one particular area. So what kind of work within the Post Super organization do you do to try to help people make those kind of choices or be informed about the sort of choices that they have?
I think it's very important to have that mid-level, or allow people to change careers or slightly change what they do, kind of. I felt like I had in sound, I felt like I had got all this great skill set that I'd spent years accumulating, and actually then I could move into something else utilizing all of that same skill set. And that was really empowering for me, because I genuinely don't think that anyone ever starts from scratch. Some people say, oh, I'm starting again. No, you're not. You're starting from some midway point that nobody else has your prior knowledge, prior experience, prior skill set, kind of. And I think that it's really important for anyone who is mid-level in their career to really realize that they have so much to offer. It's not just that they're an editor who's worked for 10 years. They're an editor who's worked for 10 years in, and they have all this negotiation experience. They have all this knowledge about the industry. They have, yes, they have, the knowledge of how to work a particular type of operating system or whatever that might be. But there's all these, and I hesitate to call them soft skills, because I think that they're the human skills around the job as well. And those are equally valuable. Knowing that if I'm hiring somebody as a post supervisor, I want to know that they can do the job. And that's not just about which button to press. It's also, there's a lot more about the job than just that. So I think that in terms of career development, it's up to you to identify your skill sets, where you're good at something and where you're not good at something. And there is always that thing that you feel like you're wading through treacle, the one thing in your kind of that is in your job where you feel like you're moving in slow motion, and if you start it, oh gosh, it's boring. You hate that part of your job. But we all have that thing that we get into a flow state on, and we could do it all day. It doesn't take any energy from us because it's so in tune with who we are and what we do. And I think, for me, 2006 to 2009 was for me identifying what am I good at and what am I not so good at. And then equally, when I started Post Super, I moved from being a post supervisor, on a day-to-day basis. And now I run a company, so, I run a company that trains people to be post supervisors. But equally, I've left behind some of the things that I found in post supervising that I felt like I was wading through treacle in. And I feel like I get into a flow state when I'm, having these kind of conversations. And I could do this all day, because I actually love this industry and I love training and I love, that side of it. So I think it's really important to know yourself. And once you know yourself, you can find something that fits you better than the stuff that you've just done because you thought that was what you were supposed to.
Yeah, it's really clear the passion that you have for it, Gemma. So actually, one of the questions I was going to ask was, do you not just miss it? Do you not just think, I'll just go back and post supervise something?
Somebody offered me a job in start of August as a post producer. Oh, it took me I almost yes, I do miss it. I do. I really enjoyed post supervising, and I feel, what, if post super comes crashing down tomorrow, damn it, I am happy to go back to post supervising. Absolutely. I will take all the knowledge that I have learned and I will use it, in that role. But I feel like I've found a role that is even better for me than what I've left behind. So I feel very I feel very empowered in this role. I use the word empowered a lot because I like it, because it's a powerful word. But yeah, I love what I do now. But yeah, I took a minute, and my goodness gracious me, the salary was good. I was like, oh, I really like the idea of that.
So what's next for Post Super then?
I am really excited about adding more training that we did these micro certifications with Avid, and I'm really proud of that. I really want to kind of train as many people on that as possible. So that's one of our key missions over the next year. I also want to create key training in other areas. So we've identified some specific things that are not being trained very well at the moment. And I would like to expand our e-learning and our training schemes to encompass those as well, because I think that it's important for people to be able to do a course in their own time, and at their own pace, but also have the support of a tutor that can support them on the journey. So there's two different parts there. So expanding the training, but also kind of doubling down on teaching this stuff to as many people as well as want to take the course.
Gemma, it's been great chatting to you. That passion just comes through so strongly about all the different things you do, and also your career path is really interesting as well. As you know, there is a question I ask everyone on the podcast. So as we're coming to a conclusion, I will ask you, which is, what is it, if anything, that keeps you up at night?
I don't want to leave anybody behind. That's what keeps me up at night. The idea that that we're leaving people behind, whether that be kind of DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that people who are entering from backgrounds which are not prevalent really in our industry are unsupported in any way, shape, or form. That annoys me. That upsets me a little bit. But the idea as well of people who are mid-level in their career, I don't want them to be left behind by the industry that there is, and I think that the way that the industry is going with the new AI developments and ML developments that we have, I want people to see that as an opportunity to up-level their skills, to use the tools that are becoming available to us, and really excel in the way that they can. I don't want people to be left behind. So that's probably what keeps me up at night. So that's, and that then comes back to training for me, is the idea that if we can train people effectively and in a way that works for them, then we can support people in their career paths.
Great to hear from Gemma, and I think lifelong learning is such an important aspect of the media business these days, and that requirement to continually learn and update our skills throughout our working careers. Now check out the show notes where there's a link to the micro-certifications which have been developed by Avid and Post Super, which Gemma spoke about, plus links to the latest releases of Media Composer and Pro Tools, so you can check out all the cool new stuff which they are delivering. That's all for now. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Thanks to Matt Diggs, our producer, and also a timely shout out to Owen Lynch and Wim van den Broek for their continued help with the podcast. Thanks, of course, to Gemma, but mostly to you for listening. Join us next time when we will delve deep again into the world of making the media.